submarine. Say it with me. Cruise ship, telegram, submarine. One more time. Cruise ship, telegram, submarine. Now, German U-boats. This was a new development that, around the time of World War I. These underwater boats that would, that would basically surface to attack British shipping. And the sinking of the Lusitania was a provocation. Now, it didn't get us involved in the war, but there were a lot of Americans after the sinking of the Lusitania who wanted to get involved in the war. But this was a British luxury liner. And over 1,000 people were dead, 128 Americans. Now, why would the Germans fire on an innocent cruise ship? The thing is, the cruise ship wasn't 100% innocent. The Germans weren't stupid. They knew that there were munitions inside this ship. And so as far as that goes, the Lusitania, it was people wondered for a little bit, is this going to draw the United States into this conflict, okay? And so now the thing is, one thing we've got to note here is that the German Imperial Embassy, put out this notice, and they said, look, okay, if you are a traveler, you're going on the Atlantic, make sure you're aware. We're putting a little disclaimer on here, cuidado, all right, that we were, watch out, because we are in a situation where we are at war. Germany and her allies are at war with Britain and her allies, and you go onto this ship at your own risk. And so, people got on the ship anyway. And sometimes, it's like on one hand, you don't want Americans dying, but on the other hand, let's remember, Darwinism here, that, it's not like this was done without warning. And remember that the Lusitania was not an American ship. It was a ship with Americans on it, but it was not an American ship. And so Woodrow Wilson was the president of the United States at the time. And he said, I came from the South, and I know what war is, for I have seen its wreckage and terrible ruin. It's in some ways, you figure it's got to be difficult, having seen that kind of destruction as a child. And so then, you see here, Uncle Sam kicks down the door, goes over to the Kaiser, and just hands him a letter. And Woodrow Wilson runs, in 1916 on the platform, he kept us out of war. Now, notice the operative word kept. I always say that if you want to know what a president's foreign policy is going to be like, take the opposite of what they say and imagine if that's true, and then proceed accordingly. And so here is, this is a advertisement I've mentioned before, but this was something for Absolute Vodka, and they were like, in an absolute world, and they show Mexico never having lost its country. Some Mexicans, are understandably still a bit bitter about that. And so here, the Germans knew about this. And, you've got here the Zimmerman note. So cruise ship, telegram, submarine. So the Zimmerman note was coded, but it was also, intercepted by the British and presented to the Americans. Now, if you're going to write something down here, write down unrestricted submarine warfare. Okay, so unrestricted submarine warfare, ladies and gentlemen. So again, the provocations: cruise ship, telegram, submarine, the Lusitania, the Zimmerman note, and unrestricted submarine warfare. And so Wilson's war message, okay, you've got a couple sides of this. First of all, you do have a self-interested motive on the part of the United States. The direct cause, remember, often we talk about the direct cause of a war. So the direct cause of like Southern secession, for example, was Abraham Lincoln's election as president, at least in the Deep South. So the direct cause of U.S. intervention in World War I here is the German policy of unrestricted submarine warfare. Now, while we're at it, make the world safe for democracy. This is part of Woodrow Wilson's missionary diplomacy. Now, the way I remember this, Woodrow Wilson, moral missionary. My students say that I look like I'm flashing gang signs or something like that, but it helps me remember. Woodrow Wilson, moral missionary. WWMM. And so let's use this as an extension of the missionary diplomacy. Now, one thing that we want to note here is that African Americans in World War I, many of them served, but they were restricted to non-combat roles unless they were fighting with the French. Okay, so the basically the Harlem Hellfighters, the 369th Infantry Regiment, the Harlem Hellfighters. Here we see they are posing with their French military decorations because they were not able to they were not able to fight on the American line. So the French said, you know what, we'll let them fight with us. We're not as racist. Now, the Selective Service Act in 1917. Now, remember that there are only 4 times that there has been a military draft or conscription in U.S. history. That is during, the Civil War, World War I, World War II, and Vietnam. So the World Wars and then one war on either side. The Civil War, World War I, World War II, and Vietnam. Now, there was a massive, stay hydrated, people, a massive propaganda campaign. And so the United States, even in 2 years, put out more war propaganda than anyone else. Now, the propaganda campaign had several elements here. The first one, recruitment of soldiers, sailors, and nurses. The second being to finance the war. The third being to conserve resources, and the fourth being to dehumanize the enemy. Now, when you look at these propaganda posters, remember thinking about point of view, context, audience, and purpose. You want to think about when you look at a poster, you want to think about who is the intended audience of this poster. And so in this case, when you look at this one here, they crucify. It is something they want to dehumanize the enemy, okay? That the enemy crucifies women, kills babies. Now, then you see enlist. On which side of the window are you? This is obviously, aimed at young men to get them to enlist, all right? And so then, on one hand, if you want an easy job, here's a wonderful opportunity for you in the Navy. Here's this guy shore on leave. Now then, if you're crazy, like, some people are like, yeah, I want to do something dangerous, join the tanks, all right? It's very dangerous. You can learn a trade. So, you learn a trade. Now, also, we see here, gee, I wish I were a man. I'd join the Navy. Be a man and do it. So basically, again, another thing that, like, you're not a man if you don't join here. Even a dog enlists. Why not you? All right. And so, so the thing is, now remember that speaking of, of women, now if you were a woman, you could become a nurse, you could knit socks. So this is a total war. Everybody's got something to do. And remember that the 19th Amendment was submitted to the states for ratification in 1919. That's easy to remember. Now, it was actually ratified in 1920, but Congress submitted it to the states in 1919. That women's suffrage is, can be seen as a consequence of World War I, because this was, women had been looking for this for a long time. All right, so as far as that goes, you see again, now these are to finance the war, okay? Now, my daddy bought me a Liberty bond. And then I'm doing my job. I'm fighting. You're an old man. You've got money. Get a Liberty bond, because his Liberty bond was paid for in full, we see here. Published through the patriotic cooperation of the New York Herald. Now, again, one thing to note here is that when we see things to save food, during World War II, there was mandatory rationing. But during World War I, it was voluntary. But there was a lot of propaganda intended to motivate people to, to save food. And so meat and wheat, okay? So you need to eat less meat. You need to eat less wheat. And so, in case you didn't know, cottage cheese, all right? That's, that's got more protein in it than meat. You'll need less meat. Just eat more cottage cheese. Plant a garden. That's going to create more food for Americans on the front. And then one of my favorites is the sheep clubs, okay, that anyone from a small child to President Wilson, like you can raise sheep and shear the sheep and you've got wool for socks. And so there's a little video available of sheep grazing on the White House lawn. President Wilson showing his solidarity with the war effort here. And so as far as that, looks like I need to find that video. Now, then dehumanizing the enemy. Okay, we see that the German is portrayed like an animal. You know, he's in both cases, he's dark. Some people have noted that this is playing to American racial fears and racial prejudices. But here, beat back the Hun. This is one of the most prominent ones. Now, you notice here that he's got blood on his bayonet, blood on his hands, and he's looking across the ocean as if he has the intention of, if he wins in Europe, he's coming to take over the United States, which there's no rational justification for that. But then again, propaganda is not rational. And so, you know, again, you've got to buy a Liberty bond, one of my favorites here. You can send the troops cigarettes, and they'll send you a little note to be thankful. The Espionage and Sedition Acts. Okay, the Espionage Sedition Acts outlawed anti-war speech and other activities that undermined the war effort. Now, you couldn't even display a German flag at this time. Now, Eugene V. Debs was a labor leader. Now, yesterday, or was it 2 days ago? I think it was yesterday. We were talking about the Gilded Age, and Eugene V. Debs on one side was a socialist labor leader. Now, Debs was leading strikes during World War I. And meanwhile, Samuel Gompers, the bread and butter unionism guy, he got the American Federation of Labor and its companion unions, its participating unions, to put a hold on strikes during the war as a patriotic duty. And so as far as that goes, Eugene V. Debs ran for president from jail in 1920. Now, why do we call this a hot dog and not a Frankfurter? This was done during World War I. Then the German language used to be a very commonly taught language, and not anymore. After World War I, it becomes un-American to speak German. And then, as far as that goes, the armistice is signed and Germany surrenders. Now, let's take a quick look here at the Versailles Treaty debate. Okay, so what happens here is Woodrow Wilson has his 14 points. Okay, so his 14 points are, now we're not going to go over all 14, but some of the principles here: freedom of the seas, reduction of arms, open treaty negotiations, self-determination of peoples, and, ladies and gentlemen, a League of Nations. Okay, make sure we got a League of Nations. And what Woodrow Wilson's trying to do here is to get a peace without victory. Now, what he runs into, though, is the United States, really compared to other Entente powers, only 2% of the military deaths. For every 2 Americans that died, 12.5 Frenchmen died. 8 British soldiers died, okay? And so as far as that goes, it's important to note here that Wilson's 14 points, they made it into the treaty, but the treaty had a lot of flaws as well. Now, but I want to go to the United States Senate, okay? When we think about the United States Senate, they've got to ratify treaties, okay? The United States Senate needs a 2/3 approval to ratify a treaty. Now, the thing is that William McKinley, after the Spanish-American War, he sent, senators as part of the delegation to negotiate the treaty that ended the Spanish-American War. Whereas Woodrow Wilson involved 0 senators in this. Now, on top of that, Woodrow Wilson came in with he came in with a Democratic Senate. Now, in 1918, the Republicans took over the Senate. In 1920, even more of a lead in the Senate. So the Republicans controlled the Senate. There was a Republican majority. He was a Democrat. And so the Republicans who were in charge, and even a few of the Democrats, that some of it's partisanship and some of it is, some disputes over foreign policy. But does the League of Nations, this international organization that Woodrow Wilson championed, does this represent an entangling alliance? And so as far as that goes, Article 10 of the League Covenant, said that basically League members are obligated to stop external aggressions. Now, one thing we want to note here, we have 3 views of the treaty. We have internationalists. These are Wilson's people. Ratify the treaty as is. Reservationists who want to ratify the treaty with reservations, that if we can put some caveats on there, then we're fine with it. And then the irreconcilables, who represented probably about a fifth of the Senate, only about 19 or 20 of them, that said don't ratify the treaty under any circumstances. Now, one thing is, if you remember the debate around the ratification of the Constitution, what you've got there with the ratification debate is that the Federalists wanted to ratify the Constitution as it was out of Philadelphia. Then you had two groups of anti-federalists, where one group of anti-federalists, they said, we don't want to ratify the Constitution at all. And then another group said, if there's a Bill of Rights, then, we're fine with that. But now the Constitution was a product of compromise. Woodrow Wilson refused to compromise, and, the United States never joined the League of Nations. Now, one thing to note here is that, some of the reservationists, a lot of them were members of the imperialist wing of the party, basically believing that America should engage the world in its own terms, to project American power. This is kind of like the Teddy Roosevelt faction of the Republican Party. And then there were the irreconcilables, this isolationist wing that were, there was a lot of buyer's remorse on World War I, realizing that, the American intervention really didn't work a whole lot of good. And so Henry Cabot Lodge, maybe somebody to remember, he was the Senate majority leader, and he had to answer the 14 points, 14 kind of stipulations, reservations here. And Woodrow Wilson, when they were asked, do you compromise or do you not? And he didn't. And that's basically what killed the treaty. If he would have compromised, Europe was fine with that. So remember that Woodrow Wilson, really in a lot of ways, his own worst enemy. He thought, we're only going, without the League of Nations, this treaty is nothing. All right. The Rough Riders, Teddy Roosevelt's unit in the Spanish-American War. Let's see. So, I wouldn't get too deep into William Howard Taft's, foreign policy there. The Mexican-American War. Let's see. So as far as that goes, ladies and gentlemen, do we have any more questions? I wanted to come back here and make sure that we didn't have any questions. Now, one thing we want to note here, okay, the United States didn't join the League of Nations. My day was pretty good, okay? Now, the irreconcilable, okay, no, maybe I hit everything, okay? But the irreconcilables, they were the folks that didn't want any kind of ratification of the treaty. But remember that Woodrow Wilson, it was a refusal to compromise. Like, had Henry Clay been president, then no, Woodrow Wilson was not against the Treaty of Versailles, but Woodrow Wilson said, we are either going to ratify the treaty as is, or we are, he's just going to let it go down with the ship. So it's like, when James Madison said, hey, we'll put a Bill of Rights in the Constitution, Woodrow Wilson said, you know what, I'll accept the reservations. But what happened was Woodrow Wilson told his people not to support the ratification of the treaty with the reservations that would keep the United States from going to war. Now, ladies and gentlemen, at tomrichey.net/apush, I just want to bring your attention really quick to something I'm going to be broadcasting at 8 o'clock this evening. This is a premium broadcast, just if you're interested. If you go to tomrichey.net/apush, then you can see here, you can look at this multiple choice strategy session that I've got going on this evening, and that is through Webinar Ninja. I'm going to be doing about an hour-long webinar at 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern. Now, that's a premium product. You're welcome to do that, but I'm going to be back the next 2 days, absolutely free at, with the Bill of Rights Institute. So make sure your friends know what we're doing here, and that these are available. And yes, good job, Miss Sanchez. We all love Miss Sanchez. All right. Now, let me, before we end real quick, we're about to wrap up. Muckrakers and yellow journalism, okay? I wouldn't say completely different, because yellow journalism sold papers. Muckraking sold papers. Muckraking also has like a higher social purpose. So it's almost like when we think about like social Darwinism versus like the civilizing mission. They're both components of imperialism, but the muckrakers, they feel like I'm trying to do good. but people really enjoyed these really sensational stories. So if you were comparing, now remember, very few things are completely different. So if you were comparing, then that's that. Okay, and it looks like Maddie may have something to show us. Well, no, I thought I saw her click something here. Okay, but I think we are running out of running out of time here, and let's see if Maddie's got anything to say to us on the way out. Okay. Yes, y'all got a dab. Okay, and here is Maddie, ladies and gentlemen. And
All right,
remember, we'll
hi
be back
guys.
the next 2 nights.
All right, thank you so much, Tom, for taking the time to talk with us tonight. Like I've said before, all the resources from tonight are going to be on the Bill of Rights Institute AP webinar page. So you guys can go ahead and access that. The link is somewhere in the chat, but I can go ahead. I'm going to post that right now for you, right in the chat. So you guys can go there for the resources. And then also the YouTube links will be posted on that page as well. So you can either subscribe to the Bill of Rights Institute YouTube page, or you can go ahead and just keep on checking that AP Prep webinar page for the resources and for the links to all the recordings. All right, I will see you guys tomorrow night, and thank you for attending.